Jen. Thanks for joining us on Conversations with Psychologists.
For having me.
So, this week we've been thinking a lot about pandemic related changes, and in many of our communities, with the shutdowns in our gyms and our yoga studios and other group exercises and activities, many of us are left wondering what we should do to manage stress and even to keep our physical and mental well being as optimal as it can be. So, given your background and your focus as a clinician, I'm really stoked to have you with me to talk about these issues. Would you like to take a moment to say hi and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jen, and before I became a provisional psychologist, my background and career was in the health and fitness industry in varying types of roles. And I have extensive experience working individually as well as with groups on how to create wellness in their life. And being a provisional psychologist has allowed me to have another platform to create wellness and kind of marry the two industries to create wellness in people's lives.
That's great.
Yeah, so with the shutdown, it's disappointing that once again that different businesses are being shut down and people are left with having to figure out what to do to cope and manage stress. Disappointing. We need to figure out solutions and use this as an opportunity to get creative on how can we bring the outside world into our homes. Yeah, and how can we perhaps shift or change or modify our strategies in ways that are sustainable regardless of a shutdown or regardless of the pandemic, something that is more sustainable long term. With the changes, I found that a lot of businesses have pivoted their platform to online. And there are so many free resources on the internet for various forms of physical activity, yoga, any type of workout, tons of resources. So spending some time Googling and trying out different types of workouts, different instructors. Also, there's tons of apps out there that have free week trials or have a low monthly cost that could be an option for people to try. So it's kind of an opportunity to try different things and maybe even different activities that someone would not even be willing to try outside of their home. That if they're really uncomfortable to try perhaps a yoga class and it's a little intimidating, the safety and the privacy of doing it at home allows people to try different things.
Yeah. I like that suggestion. I like that idea that we can be a bit more private in our home and you don't have to get into those tight Lulus. You could just wear your big baggy sweatpants and try out those moves.
Yep, sure. And I think it's also, although it's disappointing to lose some of our positive coping strategies, it could be an opportunity to get curious about new ones that perhaps time hasn't allowed before. So maybe it is cultivating a practice of meditation that perhaps wasn't part of your coping strategies before, or doing more reading, more podcasts. There's so many different types of coping skills. Of course, the physical benefits of moving your body, but there's more supports that are available and interests as well. And then just sometimes keeping it really simple. It can be as simple as going for a 10-minute walk outside and getting some fresh air and cultivating some practices that are perhaps basic and simple, but doing them, I think, is the key.
Yeah, totally. And as you said, we know physical activity is beneficial for mood, but sometimes I think people say it's simply hard to get started when our mood is sort of not at an ideal place or we're kind of isolated and feeling a bit lonely. What would you recommend in that kind of a phrasing of the circumstances?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think lots of people are having low mood and all sorts of feelings. and we may not feel like working out or moving our body, even though the evidence and research supports that we will feel better after moving our body. That's when you're sad and not feeling in a great frame of mind, that may not be the first thing that you want to do. Even as in my background as being a trainer in the fitness industry, a lot of times I would hear the lack of motivation. And even in the practice of being a clinician, I hear that a lot of not being motivated. And I think overall people are misinformed with this concept of motivation. As I've chatted with people, most of the time when people talk about motivation, it almost seems like this desire outside of themselves that's going to kind of hit them. And once that hits them, then they'll be able to do all the things. And I would argue that motivation can be circumstantial. There's some times where you may be more inspired or have more energy to do certain things. I think of kind of the new year, people are more motivated at that time to move their bodies and do new things, but it's not sustainable. And research supports that your thoughts, your feelings, and your behaviors all interlink. And the research supports that the best way to kind of break that cycle, so if you're having negative thoughts, negative feelings, you're probably not going to want to do healthy coping strategies. You may pick other behaviors that may not support positive thoughts and feelings. They'll kind of enhance the negative thought cycle and negative feeling cycle. And the best way to kind of break into that cycle is through what we call behavior activation. So it's actually doing a behavior that is positive to break that cycle. So even if you don't feel like working out, doing it anyway, you will feel better and you are more likely to do it again another time. So you will actually be more motivated after the fact as opposed to before. And you're creating momentum in that positive direction to change your thoughts and mood.
I like that. So then even thinking about like that initial phase of, okay, if I just sit on the floor and then sit up once or twice, maybe I'll start doing sit-ups and just kind of getting that start.
I think the start is for sure the hardest part. Like sometimes just showing up, that's the hardest part. Pressing play on a workout video, that's the hardest part. And so I think those small steps are really important, and it can be small steps, and that accumulates and builds into something. So a lot of times people discount those small gains and small steps, but actually it's that consistency that compounds into lasting change. A lot of times people want to go big or go home, but I would argue that more sustainable change is through those small behavior changes. So yeah, it might just be a 5-minute walk and then slowly increasing, or just keeping it at the 5 minutes is great too.
Right.
And pressing play and seeing, okay, I'm going to do 5 minutes and let's just see how I feel, and then going from there. And it's more likely that you will probably continue because you've already kind of gotten over that hurdle of pressing play, of showing up, making the decision to do it. Yeah.
Well, and I think that that part's really important too, is knowing yourself and knowing what your barriers are, right? And figuring out, how do I maybe make a work around those barriers? So if you had a client who came into your office and kind of said, like, they're pretty new and their entire thing is, I'm just not motivated. Like, where would you start with someone like that?
I would probably give them some education on what the research says. And I would kind of inquire as to, what does motivation mean to them and what does that look like? And I would probably focus on behaviors. If they were to tell me about someone in their life that they deem as very motivated, what are some of the behaviors does that person do? What does
Mhm.
that look like? And kind of break that down and kind of get curious as to what that even means for them.
Right.
Again, a lot of times people are just looking for this certain feeling. And I would argue it's about a choice. It's making a plan, making a choice, looking at barriers, like you said, of what's kind of gotten in the way in the past. And so, what is the plan for that to not happen again? And also reflecting on what has worked well at other times in my life when I have felt motivated, or when I have reached goals, or when I have done all the things that I've wanted to do. What were some strategies in place that allowed me to do that? What worked well? So just kind of taking the time to reflect as well as plan is really key. And then just making the choice to do it.
I love that. I love that. And I think honestly, like you said, it's different for every person. And so that reflection and that identification of what the needs are, the differences are, and what's standing in the way, I think that's huge. And right now, I think we all have a little bit of that big barrier, which is shift in our normal routine, right? It's not our typical normal experience. And so when we do have those downward spirals of mood, or we have more anxious periods, some of our go-to strategies just aren't there. And so having to make that shift can be difficult, but it is doable.
These constant changes that are happening in our world, they do create a lot of angst and feelings and can be quite triggering and emotional. And I think
Mhm.
just knowing that and taking this as an opportunity to have some self compassion and even cultivating that as a self care practice, as opposed to being really critical and judgmental on ourselves of, yeah, I'm not working out as much as I used to, I'm not eating as healthy as I should be, and kind of getting down on ourselves, of just having that grace and compassion um, in those moments.
Yeah.
With that said, there's kind of two parts to self-compassion. There's that soothing and comforting um, part, but there's also that reality check of, okay, what needs to be done here? What are my goals and how am I going to get there? So
Yeah.
doing that out of love as opposed to out of criticism and judgment.
Yeah.
There's a big difference. One is moving away from a shame cycle.
Hmm.
One is getting pulled into it, which usually doesn't go well. Um,
Hmm.
so that would be one thing that I would suggest, is just kind of noticing those thoughts and that internal dialogue. And that is something that can be cultivated to be more self-care and more self-compassion as well, which I think will only help people propel them forward in a positive trajectory as opposed to a negative one.
Yes. Awesome. I thank you so much. I really think that's amazing. And not not everybody is going to be great at changing their negative thoughts, and those shame spirals might be more likely for some. And so to learn more about Jen Benson and her counseling services and approach, check her out at Little Oak Psychology.